Today, we're going to explore the Liquid Road, which may be better known to you as the Ohio Erie Canal. During this program, we will see how the economy of Ohio prospered as a direct result of the use of the canal to move products to market. Your host is LaWanna White of the Cleveland Public School.
To market, to sell a fat pig. Home again, jiggity jig, goes the old nursery rhyme. As the nursery rhyme indicates, an economy cannot grow unless sellers can get their goods to market where the buyers are. Let's imagine that you go into the popsicle business. You make the popsicles at home and then sell them right here at the mall. Well, you could sell hundreds, even thousands. But how will you get your product from home here to the mall, your market? People love popsicles in hot weather, but the heat makes them melt. So you must find a way to get your popsicles here quickly. Transportation costs money. Your costs go up and your profits go down. You must find a way to transport your goods inexpensively. Ohio settlers had the same problem of moving goods to market quickly and inexpensively. While your choices today would include ships, automobiles, trucks, or even your bike, early settlers had only Indian trails, rivers, and lakes. Traveling overland was slow and hard and dangerous. There was always the danger of an Indian attack. Shipping goods east over the mountains cost as much as the goods themselves, making them far too expensive to compete with goods from states closer to the eastern markets. Canoes only held light loads and had to be portaged, which means hand-carried, around the falls and the rocky areas. No one wanted to move to the Ohio frontier in the early 1800s. People here in Ohio were poor. Because they had no way to get their crops to major markets, farmers had to sell them cheaply. Coal production was limited, since there was no good way to move it out of the state. On the other hand, imported staples like coffee and sugar were very expensive. Even window glass was a luxury most settlers could not afford because it was very expensive to ship them in by a wagon. And then in 1825, a liquid road of canals was built. Within 7 years, prosperity came to Ohio. Now, 2 mules and a canal boat could carry 100 times as much weight as 2 mules and a wagon going across the land. The cost per ton of moving a product fell from $125 to $25. In fact, wheat exports alone from Cleveland to Buffalo rose from 1,000 bushels to 250,000 bushels. Prices for Ohio products rose as they found new markets to the east and south, while imported items such as coffee, sugar, and window glass now cost far less. The liquid road became the lifeline of Ohio. I'm standing in front of a 12-foot map of the Ohio Erie Canal as it was in 1832, the year the canal was completed, from Cleveland on the shores of Lake Erie south to Portsmouth on the banks of the Ohio River, a distance of 308 miles. The canal provided an inland transportation system which gave access to major markets such as New Orleans, Buffalo, and New York. We're here at the Canal Visitor Center of the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area. The center is located in the village of Valley View, a mile south of Rockside on Canal Road. Here with me today is Ranger Rory Robinson of the National Park Service. Good morning, Rory. We're happy to be here with you, and Rory this morning is going to share with us how the locks on a canal operate with a model.
I'd be happy to show it on the model here.
Okay.
This model represents one of 146 locks on the Ohio Canal. The locks were necessary because the state of Ohio isn't flat, and as we know, boats do not run up and downhill very well. So the best way to think of a lock is to think of it as a water-filled elevator. And this is the way it worked. It was all done by hand and gravity. The first thing they do is swing open this small handle here, which controls a little gate at the bottom of the main gate called a wicket. That would allow water into the lock. Once the water level was the same on both sides of this main gate, that'd take the pressure off the main gate so you could swing it open. They claimed that these gates were engineered and balanced well enough that a 12-year-old could do this entire operation. Then they'd use a long pole to push the boat into the locks. These boats were usually pulled by horses or mules, but they'd untie the teams during the locking. Once the boat was in and tied in place, they'd close the gates up on the one end and simply walk down and open up the wicket gate on the other end.
So now the boat is in the elevator, so to speak.
So to speak.
Going down. It's lowering its elevation.
Right. Now this process took about 20 minutes at each of these locks, and with 146 of these to go through, that explains why you were looking at a 4-day trip to get from Cleveland to Portsmouth, something that takes us 4 hours by car today.
A much faster trip today.
Once the water level evened up on the lower gate, you'd swing open those lower gates, push the boat out with that long pole, tie the horses and mules back up, and continue on their way.
And there we are. So now our boat is at a lower level, and what is the distance between, for most locks, between the upper level and lower level of the lock?
Well, the lock's measured about 90 feet in length.
Okay. And the drop down would be about?
8 feet.
About 8 feet, okay. Willie, what is this waterway around the lock?
Well, these lock gates seal tight enough that they'd actually form a dam. So without a sluice, as it was called, around the locks, you'd end up with too much water on one end of the lock and not enough on the other end. The interesting thing about this sluice is it provided water power. You had a droppage of 8 feet of water in the lock, so you had water dropping off 8 feet in the sluice. As a result of the water power, it was a very common thing to see a mill built right next to a lock. So
that's why.
the canal not only provided transportation, but it provided water power necessary for industry.
So our economy was developing in many ways because of our lock system. Well, I appreciate your sharing and demonstrating the operation of the lock and mill with us today. It's been most fascinating, probably the only way I would really understand this. Thank you so much for having us with you today.
My pleasure.
Now, let's take a trip to visit a local historian who drew this map of the Ohio Erie Canal and its lock system. Today, I'm here in Canal Fulton, Ohio, one of the major stops along the now defunct Ohio Erie Canal. I have the very distinct pleasure of being with one of the citizens of Canal Fulton, who is very, very knowledgeable about all of the history of the Ohio Erie Canal. He has some very special things to share with us about his interest and his love for the canal. I'd like to share with you today some of the thoughts and feelings of Mr. Clyde Gainey of Canal Fulton. Mr. Gainey is a surveyor and engineer, and he has developed many wonderful maps that he's going to share with us, as well as his own personal recollections and his information. Mr. Gainey, here in Canal Fulton, along the banks of the Ohio Erie Canal, there's so many interesting things that have taken place. Why was it important for this canal to be built in the first place?
Well, it afforded transportation that was needed very badly, and as you already mentioned, the roads were just in their infancy, so there's a continuation of the water system from the Hudson River on through the state of New York and across the Lake Erie, and the canals were built from Lake Erie on south to the Ohio River, such as the Ohio Erie Canal, the Miami Erie Canal. But the Ohio Erie Canal was the first one built, and it started in the year about 1825 and finished its completion about 1832 down on the Ohio River at Portsmouth, Ohio.
So the Ohio Erie Canal runs from Cleveland to where?
Cleveland to Portsmouth.
Cleveland to Portsmouth. How long is that?
It's about 308 miles long, plus or minus a fraction of a mile in there someplace.
I see.
The canal was only, under the specification, the canal only had to be 4 feet deep.
Oh.
And it had certain widths, but they could go deeper than that wherever is necessary. Instead of filling in, they would got no less than a minimum depth of 4 feet, because canal boats didn't draw too much water, around about 20, 22, 24 inches a draft on them, and so it wasn't necessary to go down too deep.
Well, now, these, we started from Cleveland and we're going down, and I note that from the chart that you did for us, which is beautifully done, that Akron seems to have had a lot of activity around it. Why was that?
Well, there's quite a drop between the summit, that's in the Akron area, to Lake Erie, about 390 some feet drop. And so it is necessary to install locks to get them down from the various levels down. And there were approximately 22 locks in the Akron area at that time.
So the locks are kind of like stair steps.
That's right, just like going up and stuff.
What was the purpose of those locks?
Well, to carry the water, or to carry the boat from one elevation down to the other elevation, or vice versa. Up, carry them on up or down, whichever direction you're going in.
So it really is like a stair.
Yes, exactly.
A water stairway that allows the boat to slowly go down or up to reach a different level. All right, that's very interesting.
A little incident about the locks I'm told from what I read, and that it took about 6 hours to go through those 22 locks.
Oh.
And there would be a surrey, a horse-drawn surrey at one end or the other to haul the people into Akron where the business was. And that's where for 6 hours they could do buying or gambling or drinking or whatever they wanted to do. And so it would give them a sort of a little vacation in the Akron area, which was pretty much a shanty town then, you know, at that time.
But I imagine that because of the existence of the canal, a lot of towns grew up along the
Yes, they did. These towns, small communities sprung up all the way along the Erie Canal, from all the way from Cleveland down to Portsmouth. They sprung up in a hurry because that was a business. That's the only way they could get their produce in and out of wherever they're at. And of course, of Ohio, particularly in this district here, is a great wheat growing center and coal mining.
Okay.
And so it was a very fortunate thing that the canal went through this way. I know Canal Fulton benefited terribly good for it. So it's
because I do recall you sharing with me that very close to your home was one of the major wheat mills
yes,
here in Canal Fulton.
That's right. We had a mill on the west side of town. It was a very popular mill, which was destroyed by fire later on, called the Imperial Mill. And they made what they call pearl barley. and that's the name of it. And it was a very good grade of barley, so I understand.
Okay. I also noticed you mentioned coal was also one of the principal materials developed here in Ohio. I had not thought of Ohio as being that much of a producer of coal.
Oh yeah, but Ohio is famous for its coal mines, and particularly down the southern part of the state, and up this way, up north of the part. The coal mines don't go too far north, well, they can't go because we're almost only 50 miles from Cleveland, and I don't think there's very many mines up in that district. It started running out here in this area pretty well along.
Okay. Now, when we were talking about all of the different products that these barges carried, how much tonnage could one of these canal boats carry?
Well, they were called about 80 ton.
80
There's some
tons.
smaller. They had different size. The canal boat didn't. The locks were only built to accommodate a boat less than 90 feet long,
Okay.
and the canals are all pretty much on the same dimension. So if someone built a canal boat, it is necessary to confine its width and length to meet the lock dimensions.
I found that very interesting, that a canal boat is usually, as you said, confined to being only maybe 60, 80 feet long, and also under 14 feet wide.
Yes.
So they were really rather narrow to be carrying the amount of merchandise they were carrying. Now, these ships had, the boats as they were built were freight boats, but some of them did carry passengers.
Yeah, some of the freighters would carry passengers, which indicates on the pictures I've got there some people up on the top of the deck, and they're not all crew members. There's a lot of them are traveling. Then of course they had the Packet, which is strictly a passenger boat, and it would travel from Cleveland to Portsmouth in 80 hours. And that is quite a feat to travel
How
that.
much would it cost me if I were in that day and age, if I were going to take that ride from here to Portsmouth?
Well, some of the old writings, and I don't know how true this is, but they used to say a mile and a half for a cent and a half, and that included your transportation, your meals, and your bedding.
All right.
So,
Let's talk for a moment about how the boats were constructed and why they were constructed in that way. I noticed that most of these boats seem to have 3 major compartment areas.
well, most of them, when the captain and his family was on board, lived on board, the rear part of the boat, the stern part, was provided for the captain and his family, and the part off in the front of the boat was known as for the crew. And then of course they had a section in the middle that was used for putting their mules and horses in. Now all boats didn't have that. Just some, when they would go along so far with their boats, they'd stop and tie their mules up to a tree or something, leave them graze, and then leave them rest overnight, and next morning start out again.
Okay. Now, these tow paths, as they were called, were for the mules to walk down. But you were telling me and showing me a picture of a floating tow path. Can you tell us about that?
The floating tow path is in the Akron area, in Portage Lake. This was completed floating. It was not anchored to except on the both ends of where they get off from the earth or from the ground onto the tow path. And it was floating tow path, known as a floating tow path, and the only one, I think, it's on the canal any place. And there's some people from down at Bolivar who owned a boat. The mother used to, she was on board, she was a cook naturally, and she would carry an axe when they went across the floating tow path up on the Portage Lakes, in case that the wind coming from the west would blow the boat out too far and have it possibility of pulling the mules or the horses off of the towpath into the water. So she stood there with an axe and would be ready to cut the tow rope any time that might occur.
I'm very, very pleased that Cleveland was tied into the very first canal boat, called the Akron, and I remember it being launched in 1827, and it left from Akron and it arrived in Cleveland on the first voyage on July 4th, 1827. So that's kind of a star in our cap in
Yes,
Cleveland.
it is.
All right. Well, as you said, this was truly, the development of the canal was truly important in the development of Ohio's economic growth and development. We became a great industrial state as a result of the development and all of the many, many laborers who put their hands into developing the Ohio-Erie Canal. And I thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and all of your charts with us. You've been marvelous, and we could not have learned so much without you.
Well,
thank you so
thank
much.
you very kindly.
After leaving Mr. Gainey, I took a trip on a real canal boat at Canal Fulton, Ohio. The boat I was on was an authentic replica of a freighter, the St. Helena. The St. Helena was towed by two mules named Millie and Molly. Our mule driver, Rick, would have been called a hoggy back in the canal days. No one really knows where the name hoggy came from, but drivers were constantly calling the directions haw, gee to their animals, so canalers may have combined those sounds. At any rate, hoggies were paid the lowest wages of all canal jobs. Most of them were just boys, many of them orphans as young as 12 years old. 25,000 canal jobs were created. Large boats had a captain, two steersmen, a cook, sometimes a helper called a bowsman, and the hoggy. Towpath walkers were hired to watch for breaks in the canal and to see that they were repaired quickly. Towpath walkers also inspected locks, aqueducts, dry docks, and towpaths for signs of wear. They often helped pump out sinking boats or were called upon to retrieve small children who might have fallen overboard. In addition, lock tenders were needed to weigh the cargo, collect tolls, and work the locks all along the canal. The lock tenders assured that the flow of the canal boats moved smoothly. For 20 or 30 years, canals brought prosperity to Ohio. Land values rose from $1.25 an acre to $100 an acre. Demand for hotels, boat builders, supply stores, and many goods and services increased. As demand increased, so did supply. The economy of Cleveland, of Ohio, and of the nation grew in response to the markets created by the liquid road. European immigrants poured into this country to fill the newly created jobs, and in turn, they increased the demand for goods and services as they were both workers and consumers. As you can see, economic history repeats itself. Whether you are a producer of popsicles or of wheat, you must move your goods to market. Buyers and sellers must come together. Because the cost of transportation is included in the price of a good or a service, producers are always searching for a better, cheaper way to move goods to market. How this was accomplished in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, and how Ohio grew economically is the story of the liquid road, the Ohio-Erie Canal.
This program featuring the Ohio Erie Canal, was produced by the Consumer Education Section, Compensatory Education Division of the Curriculum and Instruction Department of the Cleveland Public Schools.